Well, welcome back, everybody, and apologies for the slight technical delay or technically problems that we had at the end of the last discussion. It just threw us slightly, but thankfully we have the technology god on our side, and we're back with you. So hopefully we'll stay that way for the rest of the day. We are continuing now because following the release of the Levelling Up white paper, we're back to discuss the prominent topic of decarbonising the current housing stock. Now, with the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund gearing up for Wave 2 in the spring of this year, decarbonising current housing stock is a critical part of achieving net zero by 2050 for the public sector. However, with more than 4 million social homes in the UK, improving the energy efficiency of current housing stock, paired with the ever-increasing energy prices and the devastating effects of fuel poverty, what do social housing leaders need to prioritise when it comes to decarbonising their existing stock? And with UK housing varying from region to region, a one-size-all approach isn't viable or cost effective. So what is the answer? Well, let's get some answers from our panel. And they are Kevin Jackson, who is the head of social value, Inspired Energy. We have Councillor Johnny Thalasitas, who's the lead member for planning, place and environment, Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea Council. We also have Darren Welsh, who's the Deputy Strategic Director, Resident Services, London Borough of Waltham Forest. And we have Tracy Harrison, who's the Chief Executive, Northern Housing Consortium. So panel, welcome you all, and thank you for joining us today. Let's start with Darren, you please, if that's okay. A question: what are the main barriers to retrofit for social landlords?
Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I think there are some challenges we have to overcome in terms of how we take forward the retrofit agenda. I think they cover areas such as data, making sure that there's good quality data around the homes that social landlords are responsible for, so that the initiatives that are put in place are targeted and are most effective. I think there are issues around funding, and certainly the London Retrofit programme has identified that to bring all of the homes in London, that's across all tenures, to up to zero carbon, would cost approaching £98 billion. So there's a huge issue there about funding. But this is about how you prioritise funding amongst other competing priorities, such as building safety, if you're a social landlord. There are supply chain issues around how you procure in a very competitive marketplace, and how you do that most effectively. And you can do that in collaboration, so there is an opportunity there. And then finally, there is a whole raft of issues around how you engage with residents, how you build the support for this agenda, and ensure that everyone is bought into it and can clearly see the benefits that come from it, both in terms of well-being and in terms of easing cost of living issues, for example.
Okay. I'm sure the other panelists will agree with everything you've just said there, Darren. And you'd also mentioned everyone being bought into this idea. So Tracy, I'm going to ask you, please, how important is tenant support when it comes to a decarbonisation programme, and how do you ensure you get it?
Oh, I mean, tenant support is absolutely vital. And, you know, at the end of the day, these are people's homes that we're talking about. And you're talking about doing something that is potentially very invasive and doesn't have the same sort of immediate benefits that maybe works that were carried out as part of the Decent Homes programme did. So that it's, you know, it doesn't have the immediate benefits that getting a new kitchen or a new bathroom has, for example. Yeah. And we know that with the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund demonstrator projects, we're seeing up to 40% tenant refusal around this. So making sure that tenants do feel supportive and are bought in is absolutely vital to the success of a programme. We think it's really important that you put tenants sort of in the driving seat around this, and we've carried out the first social housing tenants climate jury, which is a sort of citizens jury approach. with the purpose of really understanding how a social landlord should approach a decarbonisation programme to make sure that tenants are supportive. And that was really helpful because we had 30 tenants from across the north who spent 30 hours interviewing expert witnesses around this. The tenants who came to that had very varying degrees of knowledge about climate emergency, let alone different measures that could be used. And the report from that tenants jury, if you haven't seen it, I would really recommend it to you. But what we'll be doing over the coming year is trying to share the knowledge from that to make sure that all landlords can take the right approach and sort of co-create this with tenants. So can't really overstate the importance of tenant support and involvement.
Okay, I know you said you want to share this report, but are there some headlines you can give us, just to give us a flavour of what you found out?
Yeah, I mean, I guess as with so many things in life, communication is absolutely critical. It's making sure that that you communicate really clearly and effectively, that people understand exactly what it is that is going to be done and timescales around it. Tenants felt it was really important that they were actually involved, in the process from start to finish, and that tenants were involved in signing off the work. So quality was a really important feature of it, and I guess, having the ability to feel confident that accreditation that was given to a piece of work was something that could be relied upon. So, but I mean, there were a range of different recommendations coming out of it. But yeah, the headlines I would say would be to involve people early, make sure that they are communicated with really effectively throughout, and that quality wasn't compromised at any stage.
Okay, thank you for that. Johnny, I know Darren mentioned this huge figure. I think it was something around 98 billion, I think it was, initially, about decarbonising the housing stock that we have. I wondered a couple of things from you, please. How we meet these costs, given that the government isn't going to provide that kind of substantial funding required, and also how you balance that with sorting out the day-to-day priorities of things like repairing lifts, fixing leaks, updating kitchens, that kind of thing. It's a fine balancing act for anybody, isn't it, really?
It is. That's absolutely right. And if I think of our borough and the kinds of costs that we're looking at, we've commissioned some work that looks at how we can get to net zero and decarbonise our buildings in the borough. And we were told that just to do our own council estates would cost us upwards of £100 million. And that to do that across the borough, which of course is the longer term piece in all of this, and the council has a role in terms of using policy levers and sort of incentives to try and promote that in the wider stock. That could be over £2 billion just in our borough, which is the smallest in London and already one of the densest populated. So we're under no illusions about the scale of the task and what's required. And as you know, local government finance is under a lot of pressure too. We're not immune from the trends that exist across society in terms of inflation and construction costs. So I think we need to think really creatively about, again, how we can leverage our partnerships with other sectors. So obviously government does have a role to play. They're not going to do it all themselves, but they do have a role to play. So does business, so does the voluntary sector, so do estates in our borough and institutions. All of those sort of bodies that exist in Kensington and Chelsea and will do in different ways in other places. The council can play a convening role and facilitate a lot of that dialogue so that we can understand how we can share best practice, where there's external grant funding that we can collectively maximise, see where pilots have worked well and where they haven't, and then try to understand how we can adapt policy and streamline the process so that actually as the tech evolves as well, you can bring the cost down of each of these kinds of works. So I think there's a lot we can do, but you're absolutely right to flag it as a major challenge because we know it is, and it's probably the single biggest challenge we have. And when we think about it set against day-to-day priorities, we probably have the largest sort of gap between the most affluent and least affluent residents in our borough of anywhere in the country. And so delivering social and affordable housing is a huge day-to-day priority. I grew up in temporary accommodation in a housing estate, and so as a lead member for planning, a big part of what I wanted to do when I joined the council was see through that agenda too. And there is only one pie. There's only so much money in the system that you can use, and so we are constantly having to make those choices. And resident buy-in, which we've talked about already, is a massive thing. We're looking at a whole house fabric first retrofit of one of our major estates in North Kensington, Lancaster West, and that's about 800 properties. And when we came to progressing that, and we managed to get the funding, and that was a big deal for us, 40% of residents said they wouldn't even allow us into their property to do the works. And that can make retrofitting impossible itself. So I think very well made challenges to local government and indeed to everybody on the panel. And it's something that we need to work together to try and overcome.
So presumably you're still working on that 40% and trying to get them to at least let you in.
Yeah, of course. And part of that is what we've already been talking about in terms of, explaining to people why we're doing it, what it would entail, what the trade-offs are, and why we believe it's the right way to go. But that is a journey, and it's not going to happen overnight. And there's also a time pressure, because if you're a local government authority, or indeed, I'm sure many of the sort of social housing and housing association RPs, we have our own net zero targets. So we've said we're going to make the council's operations net zero by 2030. And if you think about the timelines required to get there, you've got to be starting work fairly soon and accessing the funding probably yesterday. So when you run up against those sorts of dynamics in the local community, that is something that we need to work really hard to do an education piece and make sure that we bring people with us, because popular support is totally critical. I think one of the biggest concerns I have about net zero in the round is that if we don't go through that process of bringing people with us, you could get a popular backlash against the agenda itself. And that would be the most damaging thing of all. So we need to be mindful of consensus at every stage.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know you mentioned partnerships. So, Kevin, I wondered at this stage if we could bring you in, please, and talk about the steps that organisations need to take and indeed maximise to get external funding, because this is coming up time and time again, isn't it? The need to work collaboratively, but also to have that pot of money spread so that it's not just all falling on one person or one organisation.
Good afternoon, Samina. Thank you. Yeah, it's a real challenge, isn't it? I think, well, firstly, I agree with everything that's been said previously, particularly sort of Tracy and Johnny talking about the people issues. So, there is only one pot that things need to come out of. So funding and the access to funding is, really, really important to make this happen. I think what we've seen with the funding that's been available over the last few years with the PSDF funding, it's learning, it's finding its feet as well. So it's understanding how to best provide to make the journey to net zero a simple one. But actually, it's probably not addressing the people that need the most help and the most support. Often, the applications need to be in within a few hours or a matter of days of having the scheme open. And actually, it's the people that are the least prepared to do that, probably the ones that need the most support. So I think, people are learning, but actually, I think we're only just widening the gap between those that are ready and probably would have done something themselves, that are organised, and those that are really struggling. So, what steps can you take? Well, learn from the people that have been successful. Obviously, the funding is very focused on the decarbonisation agenda, so it should really focus the money on where the most gain can be had. And as both Darren and Johnny have said, the housing stocks are very, very diverse, from sort of quite old compacted properties to sort of new build properties that are hopefully meeting the latest standards already with an amount of their own self-generation on them. So I think it's really important to understand the stock, understand where the most gains can be had most quickly. But I think it could go further. I think it could be about understanding the people side of things, how we interact with the tenants, and what role the funding can do in supporting that, and also, accessing the supply chain. Obviously, as head of social value, very keen to maximise the value that's provided through the supply chain, it not just being a product or a service that's delivered. What's the package that goes around that? And I think that could actually all form part of the application as well. So make it a more holistic, rounded application, albeit the measure probably for success is about how cost effectively you could take carbon out of the system. So maybe that's something that future funding could look at, a more holistic view to the process. That journey to net zero is a long one, and we do need to take everybody with us.
Indeed. Darren, given the role of retrofit and the fact that we are living, in these times where we've got costs of living going up, we've got fuel poverty, we've got all sorts of problems, aside from the climate change issue. I just wondered what the role of retrofit can be in tackling those costs specifically, the living costs and the fuel poverty one.
I think there's a really important role that retrofit plays in terms of the pressures that people are experiencing around cost of living, but also in terms of the wider inequality agenda. And it tackles the causes of some of the cost pressures that residents experience. For example, better insulating people's homes means that their fuel bills, their energy bills go down. And that addresses the cause of the issue rather than providing some short-term financial relief for them, which doesn't then give them a sort of more holistic response. We haven't talked about it much so far, but I think one of the things that we have found is the fabric first approach, engaging with our residents around that and the menu of options has really helped in terms of getting that wider resident buy-in, but also being able to monitor and evaluate some of the retrofit works that we have carried out, so we can continue that dialogue and engagement with our residents around the benefits that it can bring for them, both in terms of cost of living, but also in terms of wider well-being. So I think all of those things are important. I think we mustn't lose sight of some of the really big opportunities that are here. There's a huge opportunity around retrofit and green jobs, for example. The work we did on Retrofit London showed that we'd need to increase the capacity across a range of trade sectors by about 110,000 jobs within London across a range of different skills areas. So we mustn't lose sight of that big opportunity that's there as well around retrofit. Lots of challenges that we need to manage, but very big opportunities there around well-being, inequality, and employment.
Okay. Tracy, the opportunities available to social landlords through Wave 2 of the Social Housing Decarbonisation, what are they? And what specifically, I guess, what do we need to look at?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm delighted to be able to say that 35% of Wave 1 came to the north, which is really great. It means that we're going to be able to decarbonise almost 8,000 homes, which is really good news. I think that one of the things that we have said consistently, that we've touched a few times this morning on supply chain, and supply chain is a massive, massive challenge here. And what we need is long-term certainty over funding, because unless we get that, then you're not going to, engender that confidence in the supply chain that they need to invest and that they need to gear up. And I think that, whilst we as an organisation were calling for the full 3.8 billion that was in the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund to be brought forward within this spending review period, that's what we would have liked to have seen. I do feel that the not inconsiderable amount of money that we've seen come through in Wave 1 will start to build that confidence in the supply chain and the knowledge that Wave 2 is on its way. So I think that certainty is absolutely key, because I think there has been concern that this was just going to be another green sort of boom bust. and you know, that really isn't helpful. So I think that's one of the really big opportunities around it. I think the wave 2, there is also a great opportunity for collaboration amongst landlords, and for there to be more consortia bids going in, you know, demonstrate what can be done at a scale and at pace. And again, I think that's going to be really important in terms of building confidence in the supply chain. So they would be what I would see as being the major opportunities. And you know, to underline this point again, and you know, important everywhere, vitally important for us in the north, the chance to create good green jobs through this, you know, that is the absolute holy grail in this. I think that you get to upgrade the homes, but you also get to create good jobs at the same time, so you can regenerate people as well as places.
Yeah, and we have heard about the skill well today. So as you quite rightly pointing out, that is another huge area that we need to talk more about. We have got a couple of questions coming in. This one has come from Ed, and there's one for you, Johnny, I think first. It says, Johnny, it's great that you have a 2030 target for the council. What is the target for the community? How are you engaging with the local residents to get them taking their own actions to reduce carbon emissions? I think you've touched on this, but yeah, a little bit more.
Yeah, well, it's a really good question, and our target for the community is 2040. So a little bit more time, but not too much when you think about, again, how long some of these works will take and the scale of them. We do a lot of work to reach out to the community. I think greening and the environment is at the heart of what the council now does in all of our messaging. And we're trying to make sure that policies that we're implementing now are fit for the future and help us get to that target date. So we're redrafting our local plan at the moment. We're introducing listed building consent orders so that we can make it easier for residents to green their homes. We've got one out at the moment for solar panels, and we want to do the same for double glazing. But then at the sort of more layman level, we are going out into the community and holding workshops. We were doing workshops in some of our parks and schools over the past few months. We've been going out into our operational buildings. And when councillors are out on the doorstep as we head into campaign periods, we're using our platforms to amplify those messages too. I think what we're now starting to see in local government, and probably particularly in London, is a consensus that this is the key issue facing our generation and those to come after us. And so I think that drumbeat is certainly building, and it means that residents more and more are bringing it up organically too. So I think there is a lot of progress being made in terms of getting the word out and making sure it's something in people's consciousness. I mean, I was just at a resident meeting a couple of nights ago with 30, 40 people in a very tight-knit community, and it's by that, isn't it? Every night, if a different councillor in a different part of the borough is doing that, very quickly you do start to reach the entire community, and that's a big part, I think, of the job.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it is little and often, isn't it? But the message does get through. Kevin, I wonder if we could talk about the accounting of Scope 3 emissions and how that's a barrier to achieving net zero. Do you want to explain more?
Yeah, for those that aren't particularly familiar with the language and the terms, Scope 3 emissions are effectively predominantly emissions that are through the supply chain. And when we're trying to measure that journey to net zero, understanding where these emissions come from and how they're accounted for is really, really critical in being able to measure progress. So Scope 3 is really quite a challenge for most organisations to understand. And again, I think Tracy just mentioned how important the supply chain are in the sort of the process to understand the confidence levels of the investment. We also need the supply chain to be able to provide information to understand what the full life cycle carbon impact of some of these activities are, because we tend to just measure them at the point of use. So we need to actually understand their full life cycle. The production of equipment and services, and also the disposal of it afterwards. We tend to just be very focused on the in-life use rather than the full life cycle use of the carbon. So actually understanding and being aware of where the full carbon impact comes from on a supplier by supplier, product line, service line. That's really, really critical for making informed decisions. We've seen procurement regulations now change from MEAT, so most economically advantageous tender, to MAT, most advantageous tender. And hopefully the thing that really comes into that assessment, the change, will be the sustainability and the carbon impact of the selection process. So I think people really, hopefully, are becoming aware already of the environment and sustainability. It'd be nice for them to take that step a bit further and understand where those emissions come from and what part the supply chain plays in it, and how the supply chain can be engaged. And it isn't until we do that, till we look at the full carbon life cycle costings, that we're really going to make informed decisions and really have that joined up thinking on that journey to net zero. So it is possible. Most organisations just tend to use a spend-based model at the moment because it's easy and less resource impactful. We need to go further than that. So that's what I would challenge people to do: fully understand the life cycle carbon impact of their processes.
Yeah, the devil is in the detail, isn't it? Definitely. We've got one last. Tracy, it's coming for you. So the cost of retrofitting is generally stated as the biggest hurdle. When you are retrofitting so many houses, are you able to drive down the cost? And what's the average per house cost for your retrofits? We've just got under a couple of minutes. So briefly, if you can, please, Tracy, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, there's no denying the costs are absolutely eye-watering, and this is why really we have always advocated to government that although relative to the private rented sector and some of the owner-occupied sector, the social housing sector's stock is in a generally pretty good condition. We've advocated starting with the social housing stock because you can then do something at scale and at pace that will then help to build that movement, help to build that momentum and get the prices down. What we really need to be doing is looking at aggregating volume in the social sector and then looking at work smoothing programs, because at the moment you've got a scarcity of supply of materials and of skills, which is keeping prices high. So we need to get to that point where we've got the data and the plans in place so that we can pull all of that together and start to drive the prices down. And that is how we will do it. Because the truth is the costs are still too high at the moment.
So average cost, would you, because they're inflated at the moment, is that what you're saying?
Well, they are inflated, but I mean at the moment, I know with a lot of the retrofits that our members have been doing, you're looking at somewhere between £15,000 and £20,000 a property. So yeah, we need to get that down, and we can get that down with all of the other benefits that everybody's described.
Okay, I'm hoping we can do this in 50 seconds. Just a line, just a tiny tip or something, a bit of about decarbonising current house. The one thing you would encourage. Let's start with you, Tracy, please, if that's okay.
Oh, I'm going to say build your data. I think that's the starting point. We need really good quality data that we can use. So that we can work up these detailed plans and be ambitious and confident. This has fantastic opportunities for our communities, so many different benefits. So I think it's really exciting.
Thank you.
As a politician, I suppose I would say this, but bring people with you. Make sure that you keep building consensus and make sure that people support the work that you're doing, because it's such a big agenda and such a big opportunity.
No, and I think we're passionate about that. So we hear loud and clear. Thank you. Darren, what about you?
Well, just to support that, we've found with our Eco House that the interest from the community has been extremely high. So I think it's about engaging with people, showing and demonstrating what can be achieved, and giving people the opportunity to see it firsthand what it can mean for them, while recognising there are many different paths and many different approaches.
Great, thank you very much. And Kevin.
I think I'm going to agree with everybody and try and tie them all in together. So yes, absolutely have a people focus, but see if you can do that by realizing social value through your supply chain, whilst understanding the scope 3 emissions of the supply chain as well, because they're going to make up 3/4 of all the emissions. That's where the quick wins are. But yeah, do it by taking the people with you through education, motivation and awareness.
Beautifully put. Thank you, panel, for all your thoughts and for sharing all that information and best practice with us today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. So Tracy, Johnny, Kevin and Darren, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And pleasure. Thank you. And thank you also for your questions as well. It's great to get those questions in, and it keeps the conversation going for us as well. So thank you very much for that, audience. So another great panel discussion, and it's fantastic how we really do value the current housing stock we have, but also to discuss how we can see the wider effects of this and the external factors that play a role in the decarbonising process. So thank you very much for all the comments that we've had. Now, though, it is time for a very well-deserved break. It is lunchtime. Enjoy that, please, everybody. And we'll see you back here at 2 o'clock.